How do you think about incorporating a lot of the silver linings, if you will, of COVID? People have changed over the last year, and marketers who don't take that change into consideration as they move forward into the new normal won't be successful. People are proud of their new habits that they developed.
Hey gang, it's Tuesday, July 20th. Somehow, Suzy and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by one of our principal analysts on the retail and e-commerce team. It's Suzy Davidkhanian.
Hey Marcus, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Today's fact: Doritos are flammable and can be used as kindling. So if you're ever in a bind, throw some Doritos on the grill and spark them up. Though you can make kindling out of nearly anything, the flavoured corn chips are particularly handy because they'll burn for a long time. In fact, most chips will serve as good fire starters because they're made of flammable hydrocarbons soaked in oil, according to an investigation by The Star. Makes you not want to eat them anymore. Now I've read that out. The more covered in powder the flavouring they are, the longer the fire will last. That's a little tip in case anyone is camping this summer. I'm not sure how many you need exactly, so if your house goes up in flames, that's very much on you.
No, I think you just burst my bubble. I just brought back a bunch of ketchup chips from Toronto.
A bunch of what chips?
Ketchup chips. This is like a very special Canadian flavor chip that is very hard to find in the US.
A ketchup chip?
Yeah.
Is this real? Is this a real thing, or are you making this up?
No, should I show you the bag?
I do want to see the bag now, yeah.
I guess I'll have to show you after, because then there's going to be a long lag. But I promise I'll show you after. It's in my kitchen.
Listeners, I'll check this out. I promise that I'll report back and see whether this is authentic or not. Otherwise, there'll be a really long silence for no reason. Today's real topic: new pandemic personas. Ketchup-flavored chips. All right.
I mean, you guys have a ton of different varieties, actually, that we don't have here.
Most of them are pretty awful. So David Cohen of Adweek, Suzy, he wrote a piece talking about Pinterest discovering 5 new personas on its platform as a result of the pandemic. And so I wanted to talk to you about these 5, get your thoughts on some of them, and whether you think there are maybe any others that haven't been found by Pinterest, but maybe other companies, other more generic personas that have emerged from the pandemic. So to quickly summarize, there's 5 of them. In the routine ritualist, helping people incorporate new positive rituals into busier public routines. Pinterest seeing searches for workout routine at home saw already in 2021 versus 2019. The prioritized parent, lots of folks having deeply reconnected with their immediate family this last year. That's 2, the routine ritualist and the prioritized parent. Number 3, the new nomad, lots of reconnecting with the outdoors as folks spruced up their gardens and got into camping and road trips. Number 4, the eco-evangelist, people now better understanding their consumption habits, taking on new sustainable behaviors. And number 5, the emerging entrepreneur, lots of people trying to regain a better work-life balance. So you've got the routine ritualist, the prioritized parent, the new nomad, the eco-evangelist, and the emerging entrepreneur. Suzy, your thoughts on the article in general, and then maybe we'll tuck into a few of these.
So first, I didn't realize how much people use Pinterest for searching things like cute mother-daughter tattoos. That was up 93%. That I was very surprised, and probably even more that they were able to find the persona of the entrepreneur, because I didn't realize people were looking up business plans on Pinterest. I always thought it was more about shopping and being inspired and maybe the quote of the day. So I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, unique use cases.
Very unique. And then what I thought, which has nothing to do with the 5 personas, but what I thought was the most interesting part of the article was...
She's gone rogue. She's not even talking about the article. Yes, what are we talking about,
It's
Suzy?
my first time. You got to cut me some slack here. But honestly, what I thought was the most interesting point that they made was around how people have changed over the last year, and marketers who don't take that change into consideration as they move forward into the new normal won't be successful, and that people are proud of their new habits that they developed as the routine ritualist. And so how do you think about incorporating a lot of the positives that have happened, the silver linings, if you will, of COVID into the next year and thereafter and beyond? So for me, that was probably the biggest takeaway from the article.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you in terms of your overall take. Andrea Mallard, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Pinterest, had a quote in the article saying, as you figure out what's next for your brand, don't just go back to your pre-COVID COVID playbook. The world may be reopening, but it's different than before. We are different than before. And I thought that was a really good way of looking at things. People are kind of rushing to get back to what they know and get back to the old world. And it just doesn't exist anymore as much as we'd like it to.
Right. And I mean, these personas were really, really interesting, but I think the name of the personas is really critical. And while the new nomad, definitely people were at home and enjoying their outdoor space more, and you couldn't be inside, so you were looking for things to do outside. For me, that new nomad was more around how workers, like I had a lot of friends who decided to go work in Arizona for 3 months, and then they went to France for 2 months, and then they went to Hawaii for 1 month, right? So for me, that new nomad was much more around people working remotely and taking advantage of that.
Yep.
And so the takeaway for me is names are important, right? For a marketer especially. Yep. And also we use our own personal life, sample size of 1 to interpret things. And so that's what names are even more important. Your original question, Marcus, was around what do I think is going to stick? So let me tell you what I think is going to stick. I think the eco-evangelist, although I do think that the idea around sustainability and social values is pre-COVID times. It's just that maybe climate change is now in the news so much that it's echoed throughout COVID even more, especially when you think about some of those amazing pictures we saw early on when cars weren't traveling. And so we saw like the dolphins coming back. I don't remember what the real examples were, but the dolphins were coming back. Or even, wasn't there one about in Italy, in Venice, the canals were different because there weren't as many tourists?
Oh, really? Yeah, it was a harsh reminder that the world's better off without humans.
Correct. Sad, but true.
Horribly true. Any personas that aren't here that you've been reading about, thinking of, think might emerge, have emerged since?
Yeah, I thought about 2 that I made up the names, so I'm not sure if they're good names, but one is less is more. I think we understood finally that you don't need to go to as many events. You don't need to buy as many things, that, you can be with friends and family, part of your bubble, and still be happy in some ways. And the relationships were strengthened, and people were doing arts and crafts at home and do-it-yourself projects. So I do think that there's something around that, although maybe marketers will come up with a better name.
No, I don't think they will. I think we have our name right there.
And the other one, which again, sample size of 1, but I do think that there is something around the germ conscious, neat freak, clean freak, sort of, I don't know what the right words to use are, but germs are everywhere. We knew that before. Nobody ever really paid attention to it. All the Clorox commercials are talking a lot about it. I think that everyone is generally more aware of germs and maybe have changed some of their habits to take that into account.
Yeah, normally when there's a product that says kills 99.9% of bacteria, you're like, I don't care. I just want to use it to brush my teeth or to wipe a surface. And now it matters more than ever. Let's move on to another article we're reading about related to how brands and consumers are getting on in that relationship. Leah Hacker of Adweek recently wrote a piece titled Brands, You Don't Know Who Your Customers Are, and it shows. She was noting that these companies were lost before the pandemic hit, which only made the disconnect blatantly obvious, she writes, which is why many of them struggled to have something more valuable to offer than the we're in this together message that we saw a lot of at the start of the pandemic and into the pandemic. The truth is, they didn't have anything else to say, she says. And then she offers 2 such examples. One's from Victoria's Secret. She says, as newcomers emphasize fit and embracing ads with the average woman, the brand has struggled over the last 5 years to deliver on changing expectations with overly sexual ads and a view of what women want from their lingerie that is disconnected from present day reality. Another one, she says, Walmart, the moving celebration of retail workers from the CEO of Walmart fell flat as folks acknowledged that the average Walmart associate has few choices due to an ineffective leave policy. Suzy, what did you make of the article?
So I thought it's really interesting, but it's another one of those where I don't think this is new. Brands needed to be authentic and transparent before the pandemic for consumers to want to purchase from them and for consumers to feel some sort of love and affection towards the brand. Authenticity was critical. And I guess what the article is saying is that throughout the pandemic, we saw that even more. And this idea around we're all in this together, and everybody flipped their commercials to be like, hey, we're all part of this craziness that's happening. It's a collective misery. So don't worry, we're all in this together. Sort of fell flat after a while because that started to get overplayed. What I read from this article is that consumer research is critical, and understanding your consumer as you're thinking about your own marketing, your brand mission, and your brand purpose, but also because she also gave some examples around product extensions like Instagram for kids and being super tone deaf around privacy and keeping kids a little bit out of that social media loop. So I agree with her wholeheartedly, but I don't know that that was a pandemic misstep again.
So it definitely feels like it existed before, but it seems like people were willing to kind of discard it. Yes, I want you to be authentic, but realistically, I just want a quality product that doesn't cost too much. Do you think that's changed significantly, or do you think maybe we've inched closer to people wanting authenticity, but by and large, they just care about the product?
I think that this is a generational question more than people in general. Like, I think for Gen Z and millennial, authenticity has been critical from the get-go. And
Yep.
They buy products based on values and what the brand is doing in terms of social good much more often, especially when it comes to things that are not like toilet paper, right? Things that are a little bit bigger than a essential that you don't really have a choice. But when it comes to the older consumer, I think they were maybe a little bit more price driven than they were social value driven. And then as the pandemic hit and people were home more, maybe that group has moved into the social world a little bit more in terms of social good. But I do think that people in the end want to do something, but then do something different based on their wallet. So while everybody really wants so hard to do social good, that, you know, when you're presented with two things, one was fully environmentally sound, sustainable, and the other one's not, pretty much the same thing. The environmentally sound one is $5 and the other one's $3. There is a very big chance people will buy the $3 item.
Yep. Sticking with consumers and their changing preferences, habits, thoughts, feelings. Forbes contributor, contributor? How do you say it, Suzy?
Contributor?
I don't know how to talk anymore. Someone who writes things for Forbes sometimes.
Correct.
One of those people.
Yes.
Yeah. Blake Morgan recently wrote a piece highlighting 50 stats about how consumers have changed and the lasting impact of COVID. A couple of examples for you. One was 86% of vaccinated Americans expect their finances to return to normal by the end of this year. That's according to McKinsey. Another one, 74% of people are more influenced to shop via social media now than pre-pandemic. That's from Bazaar Voice. Suzy, what of these 50 stats jumped out to you and why?
I mean, you picked my Bazaar Voice one also, because I think...
Oh, I stole it from you.
You did, but that's okay, because that just reinforces how important that point is, that social media shopping is here to stay. People are looking for inspiration, and if the social media platforms make it super easy, if brands make it very easy for consumers to do a one-click buy, then that'll for sure continue on. And retailers and brands have made leaps and bounds into that frictionless social media commerce.
But you said shopping though, right? Not buying, shopping.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good call out. For me, you're right. Shopping is browsing. And buying is actually making the purchase. I think that the stat was about shopping, but it won't be as high as 74%, but I do think that there's probably some really good conversion that happens because it's so much easier to shop now on social media, and it's not as clunky. And I think that the pandemic definitely accelerated that, and consumers were ready to adapt more quickly than they were before.
What else stood out to you?
So my favorite one, but it's not very, very cool, is is maybe something that I'm worried about as well, is that the Harris poll said that 35% of people polled are nervous about small talk at the office. And I bet that that's not just at the office, but it's at a bar or everywhere, like waiting in line. I think there is going to be this weirdness around going from talking through a screen or controlling conversations through text, you know, and controlling the banter than doing it in real life.
Yep, absolutely. The hardest bit's got to be the intro, hasn't it? What are we how are you introducing yourself to people? Do you see what they're after? Do you just go straight in with a fist bump?
Are you that is true.
It's so I like to give them some options. I like to give people a couple of, should we bow? Are we doing a fist bump? Handshakes here if you need it, or if I haven't seen you in a while, bring it in for the real thing. Let's hug it out.
You're right. You're totally right. And it's like, how are you? Like, that's the usual question. But like, how do you answer that if you haven't seen someone in a year and a half?
Yeah.
That would give me some anxiety too.
Yes, yeah. My friend was asking, how is he positioning? I haven't spoken to him in a while, and he said, I'm not asking people how they are anymore because everyone's struggling. So instead, I'm asking people to offer up some fun things about them that have happened, some interesting information. So he was saying that he's asking them, give me a new thing that's happened, give me a good thing that's happened, give me a thing that's, maybe a bad thing, something you're struggling with, and then also give me something, so the good, the bad, and the undelivered. So he's asking people, what's something that you either have being delivered to you shortly or something that you'd like to buy that you think may improve your life?
I love that last question.
Yeah. New ways of interacting with each other. I'd like it if an office... We don't really have many people in the office, like a handful, but when it happened, maybe if they just said, okay, from now on, we're just going to fist bump. Because before, the custom was to handshake, and everyone kind of knew what was coming. And now, to kind of alleviate some of that awkwardness, maybe just saying, this is where we live now, at least for the next year. We're going to fist bump, we're going to do the elbow thing, maybe we'll do a little dance in front of each other, like whatever it is, like everyone knows where they stand.
I agree. I went to my first in real life cocktail party outside.
How was it?
It was good. They had on purpose made it very small, and so none of the usual people I know or the person who invited me could go. It was for the Quebec government, so none of the attachés were there. It was really just guests. So I knew nobody. So I was like just chatting with random people, but it was a very uncomfortable first hello, right? Because I was like, I don't know. Do I shake your hand? What do we do? And everybody answered the exact same way. Oh, it's okay to shake hands. I'm vaccinated. And I was like, oh my God, now we have to start talking about vaccines. And so of course that led to, which one did you get?
Oh, yeah.
And then there's all this conversation around the vaccines. And like, instead of talking about cooler things, here we are talking about COVID. I think that too causes a lot of anxiety, probably.
Yeah. It's the worst. Yeah. I'm not going outside. I'm staying indoors for the next 5 years.
I wanted to make a nod to my previous life with this very exciting morning consult number. 72% of people polled feel safe going to the department store. And that makes me very 72. Happy to know that people are feeling good about going to department stores. And hopefully that positivity translates into purchases and the department store will live on forever and ever.
Yeah, I did see some surprising numbers about malls as well, and people's willingness to get back to malls, which was quite astonishing because we feel like we've been talking about the death of malls forever, but especially during COVID. But it seems like actually no, people do want to get back to where other people are shopping. Two quick ones for you. One, 44% of Gen Z and millennials have tried a new brand. 35% of boomers, that's from McKinsey, and 25% of consumers ranked increased health and safety as the most or second most important factor when shopping in store. So even though people are going back out into the world, it's still very important to them that things are safe and clean and healthy for them. That's from PwC. That's what we've got time for the first half. It's time now for the halftime report, where we summarize the key takeaways from the lead story in about 30 seconds or so. Suzy, what are your one or two takeaways from the first half?
I would say that people have changed through the pandemic, and it's important to honor that change and keep the good that has happened in mind as you brand marketers think about the future. And tied to that is thinking through authenticity and brand transparency and making sure that you give out the image that you really are, because with people being so connected, they can see right through it. So be authentic and keep in mind that there was some good that happened through COVID and carry that through.
And that is all we have time for the lead story. It's time now for In Other News. First, a quick word from our sponsor, VTEX. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast, flexible, and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. Go to VTEX, VTEX.com/eMarketer to learn more. All right, folks, we are back today in other news. How will people shop once businesses fully reopen? What's the potential of new in-store virtual reality experiences? And how much of a splash can Apple's Buy Now, Pay Later feature make? Story 1. Lucid and HubSpot asked 300 folks from North America, so not the largest sample size in the world. They asked them which best describes how you'll shop once businesses fully reopen after COVID-19 shutdowns. Most, 35%, said they'll shop almost completely online. 35%. 21% said they'll do an equal mix of in-store and online. Just 6% said, I'll shop almost completely in stores. Despite this, Forrester Research believes that 29% of all shopping will be done online by 2024, including 10% of food and drink purchases, thanks to click and collect and curbside pickup. Suzy, how do you account for the discrepancies between what people say they'll do and what this research company and ours actually think will happen when it comes to the relationship between people shopping in store and the frequency in store and online?
That's a great question. I think there's two parts to that. One is people are probably going to be buying more expensive things online, and that's going to drive up that ratio of online versus stores. But I also think, those are once in a blue moon type of purchases, right? For a couch or a TV. What I think is happening, which is at 35%, which is obviously higher than the 25% penetration, 35% of people think that they're only going to shop online because they're buying everyday things like milk and water and heavy things and toilet paper, and who needs to lug all that stuff around, especially if you live in an urban area. So while I do think that the numbers are seemingly different, I think the behaviors explain that in terms of what are people buying online versus in store. I think it is clear that apparel will always be a store purchase unless it's something that is a replenishment item like a undershirt or socks, because that you don't really need to try it on. But if you're trying to buy a pair of jeans online, then it's really a difficult experience. And so it is so much easier to go into the store. What's critical to think about is that the store itself is changing and the role of the store is changing. And that's not because of the pandemic. It's something that retailers have always been thinking about. I think the pandemic just accelerated needing to do that. So stores are now like mini warehouses to help facilitate things like click and collect. And there's always been this idea around stores and entertainment. And I think that dovetails really nicely into your next story.
Well played.
But the idea around stores being an important place for an experience and for people to understand a brand are critical, right? And so you could definitely go to a store and be a shopper, not a purchaser.
Yep.
Because you went to the store, you looked for whatever you wanted, and then you purchased it online.
Yes.
One more example of what I find fascinating is one retailer last week or the week before announced that they're going to do the reverse of click and collect, where you can go into the store, click and buy all the things you want, and then they'll ship it to your house. And it seems like a really big idea, right? You go, you scan all the items you want, and it goes to your house. However, I know firsthand that there's at least one company that was doing that before, which shall remain nameless, but is part of my legacy experience, where, you could have gone to a Macy's well before the pandemic, ordered something online, and it got shipped to your house because it was either too bulky or too heavy, or they didn't have it in store. So I do think that stores are important and they're here to stay.
When you're talking about the products, just to go back to that for a second, it does seem as though there are going to be kind of a splintering, a fracturing of the products that we think about when we buy them online and the ones we buy them in store. Like you were saying, like paper towels, you don't need to see them, and they're going to be maybe become more of an online product. And then there's things like jeans, which will be more of an in-store product. And it does seem like there's going to be products in general, and then they'll break into the kind of two camps and where people buy those. Talking about the store, our second story 2, at Harry Potter's new flagship store in New York, visitors can check out 2 new virtual reality experiences called Wizards Take Flight and Chaos at Hogwarts. Notes Richard Collins of Adweek. The VR experiences include headsets, broomsticks, and hand controls. Both became available last Thursday, July 15th, and are each about 30 minutes long, costing $34. Mr. Collins of Adweek writes that, quote, near term, the Harry Potter store's use of VR points to how retailers might captivate consumers and attract shoppers to walk through their physical doors, close quote. Suzy, your thoughts on this in-store virtual reality experience?
So I am not a Harry Potter fan. I know it's very shocking.
Same.
But I do think that it sounds very cool, right? It's everything to the wand. The wand is included for a measly $34, which to me sounds quite expensive, actually. But obviously they did their consumer research and they figured out that under $35 people are willing to spend. It's like $1 a minute, and they're willing to spend that.
I think they've downplayed it. I think Harry Potter people are crazy. They'll spend any amount of... They've definitely lowballed. You could have put the price way up, Harry Potter store.
Who knows? Maybe they'll do that after. They'll launch it, see that they could. Crazy lineups, and then they'll start charging more. What I do question any VR experience from an in-store perspective is, does it actually lead to buying? Or is it just a fun entertainment brand recognition type of activity? Or does it help the store increase their sales per square foot metric?
And does it spur people to want to buy things in that moment in the store, or do they get more wrapped up in that experience and end up going away, and maybe they end up, maybe they've seen the movies and they end up buying the books because they feel more part of that world?
Yeah. There are other VR experiences or AR experiences that are potentially more buying sort of worthy, in terms of like the digital fitting rooms that might help you visualize an outfit, so you don't necessarily need to try the earrings or the shoes on, and you can figure out if that's going to look good and you're going to buy it. So I do think there is some connectivity between VR, AR experiences and making purchases and facilitating. But I think VR for the sake of VR, if you're not removing a friction point for the consumer, then it's really just entertainment. It doesn't need to be retail.
Yeah. Some of the prices of the Oculus devices, the recent ones, are driving the consumer price down, but still $200-300 for a headset can be expensive. Entry point for a lot of folks, and so businesses have more money, and this sounds like this experience was very expensive. They worked with a lot of different studios to produce this experience, but stores with more money are able to offer people a gateway into the virtual reality world. We forecast that about just under 9% of the American population are VR headset users. Next year it will go up to just under 10%. That translates into close to north or south of 30 million people, so a lot of folks. Story 3, Apple is working on a buy now pay later feature of its own called Apple Pay Later. As Bloomberg reports, Apple is working with Goldman Sachs to make every Apple Pay transaction a possible buy now, pay later BNPL opportunity, where you can pay in installments. No Apple Card necessary. Users can pay in 4 interest-free installments over 2 weeks. That's called Apple Pay in 4. Or the other option is to pay interest over several months. That's called Apple Pay monthly installments. Very appropriate name, notes Bloomberg. Suzy, how much of an impact can Apple Pay Later have on the current BNPL, buy now, pay later landscape?
So I do think Apple's going to make a big splash. We already know that from a proximity payment, they're number one, well ahead of the next one in line, which is Starbucks. 16% of the US population is an Apple user, so already that's a very large base. They're just, following the shiny penny. Everybody's talking about buy now, pay later, and so they want their own fair share of that market. I don't know how many of the current providers even have these two different options. So I think that Apple's working with Goldman to figure out what is the best way to move from just the credit card that they launched recently to now this next big thing. We know that proximity payment and the digital wallets are huge for retail. My personal opinion, though, is how much friction does that remove for a consumer? And if I don't know ahead of time when I'm thinking about a big purchase that this is an option that's available to me, does it matter? And I think Apple Pay has really figured that one out, because it's available on everything, I think, because they're the ones fronting it.
Yeah, interesting thoughts there. So Apple's Pay Later service, it's going to be automatically downloaded onto those millions of iPhones in the country. 47% of people in America have an iPhone. Pretty much everyone else has Android device. In terms of the top 3 buy now, pay later services, we've got Klarna, Afterpay, and then Affirm. Afterpay and Affirm's shares dropped 10% after this news. And in terms of the market for buy now, pay later, 45 million people using the service this year. That is up from 12 million 2 years ago. So from 12 to 25 to 45 this year over the last couple of years. That 45 million calculates to about 16% of the population, the US at least. It's also interesting by generation, Suzy. US buy now, pay later users. If you look at the penetration for Gen Z and millennials, it's north of 30%. For someone who's a boomer, it's just around 6%. So huge discrepancies by generation as well. That's all we've got time for this episode. Thank you so much, Suzy, for joining me.
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun.
Absolutely. Thanks to Victoria, who edits the show. Thank you so much to everyone who took time to listen in. Nicole Perrin will see you tomorrow, hopefully, for the Behind the Numbers ad platform, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX, where she'll be speaking with Jed Dederick at the Trade Desk.